Hello and welcome to a short update on employment law for the academic year 2023 to 2024. Those of you who have seen these series of videos before know that I have a Gumroad course that is available and will link to in the description for this video that is available for a reasonable price, probably the same amount that you would pay for any revision guide, and it contains a whole series of videos on one topic. I have one on family law, one on commercial law, and of course one on employment law. The videos are a few years old at this point, but they are still up to date with the relevant legislation and stuff. And also each year I try and provide an update on some of the key highlights from the past 12 months, and just in order to provide students with a little bit more ammunition when they go into an exam or when they are writing a piece of coursework. So with that in mind, let's get started. One of the main things that has involved employment law over the past 12 months is the continued strike action. And we've sort of seen a summer of strikes with nurses going on strike, rail workers going on strike, teachers going on strike, and it's one of those things that has really been dominating the headlines. And the government has attempted to respond to this, but has kind of ended up putting its foot in it more than anything else. In fact, the Trade Union Congress has actually reported the government to the UN's International Labour Organization over one of the pieces of legislation that has been passed this year, the Strikes Minimum Service Levels Act 2023. And that legislation does a lot of things, but essentially it comes down to certain key professionals such as nurses and rail workers potentially having to work during industrial action or be sacked. Now, there is, under international law, a right for workers to strike, and obviously this interferes with it. So that's the nature of the complaint, and as we move forward into 2024, it's likely that we will also see domestic legal action taken against this legislation as workers and unions seek to challenge it. One of the other things that the government has tried to do to mitigate the effects of strike is to allow employers to hire agency workers to cover the work. Now, obviously, this defeats the whole point of a strike, which is meant to be disruptive and meant to be a last resort. So ASLEF and Unison, and I think other unions as well, took the government to court over this in this Crown on the application of ASLEF and Secretary of State for Business and Trade case in 2023. That was just a few months ago. The government found in favour of the union's favour and quashed the legislation that allowed for agency workers to take the place of striking workers. So there's a lot of other legislation that's come out already this year. We've seen the Carers Leave Act, which gives workers the right to take unpaid time off in order to care for a dependent. That's about a week that you get with that. There's the Employment Relations Flexible Working Act, which allows for employees to request from their employers that they are able to work flexibly. Obviously that request can be turned down, but there is a statutory right to ask for that now, and reasons do have to be given if the request is denied. Neonatal Care Leave and Pay Act 2023 is to do with if an employee has a child who, after they are born, spends 7 days or more in neonatal care, and that gives a right to 12 weeks off. We've also got the Protection from Redundancy, Pregnancy and Family Leave Act 2023, which is when if someone is pregnant or taking parental leave, they will be offered a chance to work in other employment within the same business if there are redundancies being made. Obviously that depends on whether such an alternative position is available, but it just gives a bit of extra protection to people who are expecting children and obviously probably don't want to be made redundant during that time. Similarly, Workers' Predictable Terms and Conditions Act from 2023 is another important change, and this basically gives workers the rights once they've been at a job for around 6 months or so just to put in a request that the hours and times that they work becomes more predictable and more regular. This is going to obviously affect things like agency workers and people who are working unusual hours. Just gives a bit of more options for them so that they can have a good life-work balance. Finally, at the bottom, I have put the retained EU Law Revocation and Reform Act 2023, which is the controversial piece of legislation which threatens to sort of remove a lot of the EU protections that we previously had before Brexit. They were retained after Brexit took place, but now the government is seeking to cut down on them. We don't really know how this is going to operate yet, but obviously a lot of workers' rights do derive from EU law, such as the Working Time Directive and transfer of undertakings as well. So definitely something that we'll have to look out for into 2024. There's a couple of interesting cases. To be honest, these are actually sort of almost more funny cases than anything. Pereira and Stonegate Pub Company Limited is probably one of my favourite employment law cases now of all time. This basically says that if an employee falls over while they're on the job and the employer laughs at them, then that is not a form of discrimination or anything like that, or a form of harassment. It's quite an interesting judgment because the judge talks about how the slapstick nature of someone falling over is likely to cause someone to laugh, and that's not necessarily mean-spirited or part of like a harassment campaign. So there's no case there. Similarly with Mrs. Cope and Razzle Dazzle Costumes Limited, that's enjoyable to say. In that case, there was quite a tense meeting between the employer and the employee. The employee said, "I'm done," and walked out, and the employer treated that as resignation. But obviously it was in the heat of the moment, and so the tribunal in that case said, actually, no, this isn't someone resigning, this is just the employee in this situation expressing their frustration, and in order for there to be a resignation, there would have to be something much more formal than just saying, "I'm done." As always, at the end of these videos, there's different pay rises, so these can affect different calculations, especially if you're a student working on an exam or a piece of coursework, and you're trying to work out how much an employee or worker is entitled to. Sick pay is now at £119.40, the national minimum wage is £10.42 per hour, and statutory maternity pay, after it goes down for the first bit, is £172.48 as a minimum. So I hope that was a useful update for you, covering some of the key elements from employment law over the past 12 months or so. As I said at the start, this is based on the Gumroad course that I've provided for students, and many people have bought and enjoyed. So if it sounds like something that you'd be interested in, perhaps you're studying employment law this year, then do check out the link in the description to this video. If you enjoyed the video, then like, comment, subscribe, and I will speak to you again shortly.